All right, welcome to ANC today. I get the rare honor of making an introduction. Usually the camera cuts to Lamar and everybody's off to the races, but I get to introduce our guest musician today. I thought this would be a funny sentence. Trey and I don't share a lot in common. How do you like that for an intro? Trey's a Harley guy, I'm a vintage Triumph guy. He went to the University of Alabama, I went to community college and then to seminary. Trey likes Jack and Coke and Coors Light with a cigar. I prefer fine tequila and electric jellyfish with a pipe. Trey and I are different people, but we share this much in common. We are both deeply moved by the work of David Ramirez. That's the truth. In a recent staff meeting, Trey said, having David come play music for us would be in his bucket list for 2021. I guess staff meetings consist of what would the world be like if we could change things, right? And so I just grabbed my phone and I texted David and I said, could you do it? He said yes, so here we are. If you don't know how this works, if you don't know how my mind works, maybe you don't know how important singer-songwriters are to me, but they are. And if you don't know David's work, you have so much beauty and grit to discover, I almost envy you. So here's my advice. Go back all the way to the beginning, buy every single record and EP ever released, and work your way through that evolution up to this moment. I remember the first time I heard him sing, it was at a cubicle at America's largest church with Micah Bickham leaning over my shoulder. And ever since then, I have raised my children on your lyrics, Brother David. And in my book, that is about as high an honor as you can confer on anyone. So it's been a rough year, but I get the feeling that as long as our poets and our songwriters and our artists are doing their work, I get the feeling that we will have something to hang on to. So David, take us to those sacred and raw places that only you can.
Thank you. Well, I never paid attention when I was a young boy to the great instructions from the ones who came before me. Now that I'm older, I long to pay attention, but it doesn't seem like anyone is saying much anything. There's a piece of me that loves all this sadness, that loves for onlookers to call me tragic, buried underneath all the women and the booze is a man who I know who's ashamed of what I choose. Well, I believe in God, and I believe He wants me to believe in me. So what's it gonna take to make this stop? What I gotta do to know I've got all the strength inside my bones to let it go, to let it drop. Well, I've been holding on so long it seems. What I'm holding's been holding me. Thank you so much. Good morning to everybody. This is the earliest I've played in public in many years. Many years. But thanks for having me, and thanks for the kind words. I've stood in Roman cathedrals, prayed in Southern Baptist chapels. I've never heard a voice, so I ain't paying a penny more. Oh, tell me where to find the Lord. They raised me on donuts and coffee. Under fluorescent lights, we watched outdated movies. It smelled like a hospital, but no one was being cured. Oh, tell me where to find the Lord. Tell me where to find the Lord. Oh, tell me where to find the Lord. How the hell am I supposed to knock on heaven if I can't even see the door? Here, won't you tell me where to find the Lord? So I traded in my pew for a bar stool. I was trying to find redemption in the mind of the youth. We'd just sit tall with our cigarettes and disheveled uniforms, and I never saw the Lord. Tell me where to find the Lord. Oh, tell me where to find the Lord. How the hell am I supposed to knock on heaven if I can't even see the door? Here, won't you tell me where to find? Because my biggest fear in the whole wide world is introducing myself in the grave. Because after all of my years of living free, well, I don't have much to say. Oh, 'cause the longer I live, well, the more I know that I'm gonna die. And the more questions I have, well, the less I wanna try. Time was winning so many times I just stopped keeping score. So won't you tell me where to find the Lord? Oh, tell me where to find. Won't you tell me where to find the Lord? How the hell am I supposed to knock on heaven if I can't even see the door? Won't you tell me? Someone tell me where to find the Lord.
Right. David, bro, thank you. Thank you. We create some noise and some great moments, and then we create some transcendent moments. And let's hope that the preacher today doesn't mess up what the troubadour just created. So welcome to ANC today. Some of you are Googling the word troubadour, T-R-O-U, just to help you spell it there. So good morning. We are all here in this space, and what a treat to have David do worship for us. I'm proud of a church that will gather around poetry of all kinds. It doesn't have to be the music you grew up on, for it to be the gospel. David and I have this conversation going all the time. It turns up in the darndest places, doesn't it? And it redeems and releases us as it does. So if you know me, you know I have a soft spot for singer-songwriters. I grew up on Willie and Cash and Townes and Jackson Browne and James Taylor and Dolly and Emmylou and Ronstadt and Ricky Lee and Anais Mitchell. I still believe in the power of a song stripped down, bare bones, and straightforward. But of all the singer-songwriters in the business today, David is my favorite, and it's not just because he's here. It's also not because, weirdly, he was one of the first musicians that ANC hired back when it was a baby church in the living room. That goes way back. It's pre-COVID, in the old world. Anyway. But I love him because he delivers honest, raw, real lyrics with grit and with soul. He reminds me of how sacred life's longings actually are. Anyway, I heard David do a version of my favorite hymn of all time, which he'll do next after the sermon. It's called How Deep the Father's Love for Us. I heard it during the great pause from his living room on Instagram, and that's where this idea was born. It seemed fitting, since somehow we're talking about memory. Music holds mostly all of my memories, and I think it's really fun to discover as a dad how that's also true for my kids as they're getting older. Music holds the secret to how I remember everything that went before. And I don't know if the world will remember, frankly, the 20th century American theology very fondly, but it won't be surprised if it shows us kindness given the quality and the depth of our songs and our hymns. That's what will sustain us in the end. So, we've been hanging out in the Old Testament books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, if you've been following along. We've been at this now for weeks. And like most good adventurers, we didn't have any idea where we would actually end up as we began this journey. We just kind of knew that it felt compelling to do a long study on leadership and character during this election season, which for some, I guess, is still going on, oddly. In Georgia, it might still be, but for the rest of us, I think it's been resolved. And it felt like a compelling thing to talk about as we looked at the fall. And it's produced several surprises. Among them, for me, is this focus on memory as a function of faithful leadership. You see, I had misremembered this detail of the David and Goliath story. When confronted by an immovable object, without missing a beat, David remembers the monsters that he had already slain. His way forward was through this giant, which he assumed was possible because it somehow always had been. Memory, it has a ton to do with how we move forward. That's why our stories matter so much. You see, part of what we're digging around here in these old books, attempting to make sense of, is what does good and healthy and responsive leadership actually look like? We have plenty of bad examples. Our question has been and is, what does it look like when it's in health? Well, the text suggests that it has something to do with having this heart of God, something to do with becoming a people after God's own heart, as the Old Testament authors preserve for us, which is exactly what is said about David. And I argued last week that I think this heart of God reference, at least in part, is a way of referring to how David remembered. He was far from perfect, we know this, but he allowed the giants in his way to remind him of God's faithfulness. Giants can, if we let them, jog our memories. You see, we've done hard things before. We've dropped more than a few giants in our time, but we forget, don't we? And today's text comes to us from 2 Samuel chapter 9. So roll the clock forward in the story of David a bunch of years. At this point now, Saul is gone, and Jonathan, his son, is gone as well. Jonathan is who David loved. David is now reigning unrivaled as a monarch during Israel's gilded age of prosperity and abundance. And 2 Samuel chapter 9 represents a transition in our storyline. No longer concerned with subduing the enemies of Israel, now the narrator is focused on telling us the story of succession to David's throne. Which of his sons would lead when he is gone? And you can sense the change of gears coming after you read chapter 8's summary of all the king's conquests. Side note for you in case you're interested, I'm not a big fan of all the battles these ancient kings fought. I've always been more of a poet than a soldier. I don't know how to harmonize the story of a loving God who speaks kindly and softly to some, while also harmonizing that with the image of a God who then orders David and the nation of Israel to obliterate her enemies. I've never been comforted by that version of God. Don't forget, one thing is what the authors say that God said in the text, and another thing is who God actually was and who he was evolving to be in their awareness. You see, it's never a precise overlay. And I don't believe in war, as it turns out. Maybe this will offend you. Hang on. We're going to get back to David in a minute. I believe God is on both sides of the gun, to quote an old phrase song. That's for you, Sam, that was the record that was big maybe when Sam was a senior in high school. I don't believe violence transforms human beings, which is also why I don't believe in capital punishment. Uh-oh, the preacher just got unhinged, Trey. What are we going to do? Here's what I think. Violence perpetuates more violence. You know this to be true. The cycle never stops. And I don't think any of these are political statements or ideologies. I see them as basic statements about the sanctity of life. Anyway, 2 Samuel 8 describes the military victories of David: genocide, gratuitous cruelty to animals for no objective purpose. It's all there if you really want to go find it. And this chapter effectively closes the discussion about the legitimacy of David's rule, and now the author transitions to the concerns of succession. And it's right here in the middle of this ground, in the middle of this interstitial space, that we have one of my all-time favorite stories of the gospel as it turns up in the Old Testament. Once a form of peace was established through all of the military conquests, and you know that peace only is peace for one side. Anyway, all of that aside, once David secures peace for his people, he sits down and he remembers. I remember hearing Pastor Jamie, my childhood pastor way back in Florida, back in the 80s, preach on this so many years ago. It's one of the sermons I remember most about my childhood. And just to give us some context before we read this story, David was completely in control of his world by this point. The text literally says that God gave him the victories wherever he waged war. But David wasn't just a soldier, as you know. He was also a poet and a songwriter with a long memory. And so 2 Samuel 9, verses 1 through 8 read this way. David asked, "Is there anyone left of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness for Jonathan's sake?" Now there was a servant of the house of Saul whose name was Ziba, and he was summoned to David. And I just love how it preserves this old conversation. It's a little clunky. The king said to him, "Are you Ziba?" Well, of course he is. That's who you summoned. And he said, "At your service." And the king said, "Is there anyone remaining of the house of Saul to whom I may show kindness, the kindness of God?" And Ziba says to the king, "There remains a son of Jonathan. He is crippled in his feet." The king said to him, "Where is he?" Ziba said to the king, "He's in the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, at Lo-debar." Then King David sent and brought him from the house of Machir, son of Ammiel, in case that wasn't clear, at Lo-debar, in case you needed to know. Verse 6. Here he is. Mephibosheth, son of Jonathan, son of Saul, came to David and fell on his face and did obeisance. David said, "Mephibosheth." He answered, "I am your servant." David said to him, "Do not be afraid, for I will show you kindness for the sake of your father Jonathan. I will restore to you all the lands of your grandfather Saul, and you yourself shall eat at my table always." Verse 8. And he did obeisance and said, "What is your servant that you should look upon him, that you should look upon a dead dog such as I?" Now remember, any remaining heirs from the house of Saul would have been seen as a threat to David's rule. David knew this, and as our story begins to center on questions of political succession, it would not have been the time to rescue legitimate heirs to the throne from rival dynasties. You know how this works. Just draw from your memory of every show you've ever seen on PBS Masterpiece with men in frilly collars with British accents. You know how this goes. Offspring from a monarch could rally military support and make a claim to the throne as long as they were alive. When a dynasty shifted directions, and it happens all the time, it would have been customary to kill every single surviving member of the former house, and in so doing, terminate any internal threat to the crown. But David was different. He loved Jonathan, Saul's son, and he missed him terribly. And because of his memory of Jonathan, he made inquiries. The Bible says that David and Jonathan had made a covenant to look after one another's children. Some scholars think that David felt obligated to show kindness because of the oath that he had sworn to Jonathan. But nothing about this passage feels to me like obligation. I think it's possible that David had actually become the kind of person for which senseless, over-the-top, radical kindness was natural. His heart, after all, was like the heart of God. Now, I don't want to make too much of this next point, but I feel like I'd be skipping something if I didn't at least mention it. The text suggests that Jonathan and David were lovers. If you read the story from beginning to end, it doesn't say it once, it says it multiple times. These two loved each other uniquely. Now, hang on. See, in German scholarship, they've never managed to cover this up like their English-speaking counterparts have, the ones that we read. There is a long and sordid history of homophobia in the English language biblical scholarship. And you don't need to take my word for it. We can trust Kathy Baldock and Ed Oxford and the great work that they have done. If you need that later, I will show you where to find that. But it shows up in our text, and the translations that follow the English lead very distinctly. Something that's not in the original, something that's also not in other major veins of biblical scholarship. You see, most of what you and I have ever read about Jonathan and David frames their love in the context of friendship. But to me, the text seems clear enough. These two were lovers. Earlier in the story, at the beginning of 2 Samuel chapter 1, when David finds out that Saul and Jonathan had both fallen in battle and were dead, David writes a song of lament. And you can find it in 2 Samuel chapter 1. I won't read the whole thing. It's a secondary point to what we're saying today. But it ends with these words. You tell me what you see here. And this is David writing a song of lament. He says, Saul and Jonathan, beloved and lovely, in life and in death, they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles. They were stronger than lions. O daughters of Israel, weep over Saul, who clothed you with crimson in luxury, who put ornaments of gold on your apparel. How the mighty have fallen in the midst of battle. Jonathan lies slain upon your heights, your high places. And I am distressed for you, my brother Jonathan. Greatly beloved were you to me. Your love to me was wonderful, passing the love of women, David writes. How the mighty have fallen, and the weapons of war have perished. See, I'll spend a lifetime studying this text, its oddities and idiosyncrasies, but I will never claim it. I will never clean it up for you and claim that it says something that it doesn't say. To make you feel safe or certain or normal or right, that's not the objective. Anyway, around here at least, we know that love is love is love, and that love comes from God. We no longer have to scrub these old stories of the elements that made those who came before us blush simply because they couldn't accept the details as recorded. The story is what the story is. Just know that when David sits down to enjoy the rest that his military victories had provided, his thoughts drifted first to Jonathan. And the only remaining survivor from among the children of Jonathan was Mephibosheth, a young man who had suffered greatly. And so, this heart of God, crammed into an ancient and violent king named David, does something almost impossible to comprehend. He makes a friend out of an enemy. You see, church, the gospel is buried here. It sure is. I can't access it in the butchery or the genocide or the political subterfuge designed to preserve monarchies or dynasties or economies, but I can see it as plain as day in the random, senseless, risky kindness of an ancient king who welcomes a rival claimant to the throne to eat daily at his table. And he didn't stop there at the table, did he? David restored to Mephibosheth the lands that belonged to his father Jonathan, which would have been considerable pieces of land, considerable wealth. He restores them to him. There is nothing to gain here for David. Remember, this isn't obligation or duty. This feels like delight. This feels like love coursing through the veins of memory. This feels like the unmistakable heart of God. David had become the kind of person, the kind of king, the kind of leader who remembered well and then moved to action. You know, whereas Saul sought to protect his reign, Saul the king before David, going to great lengths to kill any and all threats, including David, after Saul anointed him, David seeks to show honor to the house of Saul. Here's what this story is pulling up for me this week. This God that heard the broken heart of Hannah's prayer, this God that spoke to Samuel even as a small boy, this same God that anointed Saul, offering him a new heart, this same God that David loved and wrote songs about. This God, this distant, mysterious, often confusing, if we listen to this God, if we follow this God closely enough, this God might teach us how to be different kinds of people. And I don't mean slightly different. We're not talking about gentle modifications. We're talking about completely transformed people. I don't know how else to say this, and you may not be ready to hear this yet this week in our sort of trajectory as a country. But by the time we're done learning from this God, we don't need the conventional categories of enemies anymore. We don't need them anymore. Oh, church. I'm not saying that I live like this quite yet. I don't, but I can see it. I can feel this God pulling his ways, pulling me even now to let go of my need to call people enemies, to welcome home even those that I have allowed myself to hate, to feel threatened by, to exclude. Perhaps you're a little bit like me, and you actually think it's safer when you have no obvious threats, when no giants are staring you down, tempting you to misremember your own story, when everyone gathered around the tables at which you recline already wholeheartedly agree with your opinions. Maybe you have bought the lie that says that means you're safe. But the good news here is so much bigger than our sense of safety or our need for unanimity. David would pick up on this idea of reclining at the table in the presence of his enemies in his number one hit single, recorded later, called Psalms 23. You might know that tune. And of course, Jesus would draw from this same divine impulse centuries later when he commands his disciples to love their enemies. You see, anyone can love a friend. And the Apostle Paul will draw from both David and Jesus when he tells the young church at Ephesus that our battle is not against flesh and blood. People are not our enemies. You guys, you know what the world needs right now? The world needs people of love who have no enemies. That category just isn't useful to us anymore. So I don't know, church, maybe the reason I love this little story about an ancient king and his senseless kindness towards a crippled heir of a rival dynasty, maybe I love it so much because I feel often that overwhelming gratitude that Mephibosheth gives voice to when he's summoned before King David and he says these words. He says, "What is your servant that you should look upon a dead dog such as I?" I'm not saying that it's healthy to think of oneself as a dog. It's not, and nearly all of my therapy work over the last few years has focused specifically on this and helping me get free from this kind of thinking. But here's what I am saying. The road home from self-hatred has always been radical, risky, ridiculous kindness. I feel like my intro to this story is through the role of Mephibosheth. But the story of love won't be complete in my life until I can see people like David did, not as enemies or as threats, but as people worthy of a place at the table at which I recline and I recharge. So Thanksgiving is coming, speaking of tables, and we will be tested, won't we? It might be the most important table around which we gather all year, and some of us dread it. And I'm making you this covenant, this promise today, that I will refuse to see anyone seated there at my table as my enemy. I have no enemies anymore. Neither do you. I wonder, church, is the love of God this good? Could it be this good? Oh, I pray that it is. Pray with me. Lord God, hear our heart today. Lord, we've come to the end of our own pursuits that created enemies out of friends and made us feel attacked. And that violence creates damage in the soil of our own inner gardens, of our own hearts. And help us, Lord, today to pull that from where it is, to be a people of love, a people of memory. In your name we pray. Amen.
How deep the Father's love for son, to make her rich his treasure. How great the pain of searing loss. Father turns his face away, wounds which mar the chosen one bring many sons to glory. Behold the man upon the cross, my sin upon his shoulders. Ashamed I hear my mocking voice call out among the scoffers. It was my sin that held him there until it was accomplished. His dying breath has brought me life. I know that it is finished. I will not boast in anything, no gifts, no power, no wisdom. I will boast in Jesus Christ, his death and resurrection. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot find an answer. This I know with all my heart. His wounds have paid my ransom. Why should I gain from his reward? I cannot find an answer. But this I know with all my heart. His wounds have paid my ransom. Thank you so much. And thanks for having me. Thanks for the word. Hope y'all are all staying safe and sane out there. Fingers crossed, sooner than later we'll all be together again. I wish upon you peace, wish upon you grace, wish for less of what you want, more of what you need. Wish upon you an old life with a heart that stays young. Oh, but most of all, I wish upon you love. I wish upon you truth when all you feel is doubt. I hope you know that an open mind still knows when to shut things up. Wish upon you a brave heart that will always rise above. Oh, but most of all, darkness, you can find the light. You'll find the light. You'll find the light. Oh, yeah. Even in the darkness, you can find the light. I wish upon you an easy life. I wish upon you hard times. I hope you know both joy and pain each need their moment to shine. I wish you ears that are quick to listen, that are slow to use that tongue. Oh, but most of all, I wish upon you love. As the sun sets where the moon begins to rise, so even in the darkness, you can find the light. Find the light. You find the light. Oh, you'll find the light. Oh, yes. Even in the darkness, we can find the light. We can find the light. Even in the darkness, you can find the light. You can find the light. Praise the Lord. I saw the light.
All right. Thank you, David. You guys out there in the live stream space don't know how awkward it is to watch about 8 people clap in here. I guess they figured that you got to clap. Thank you so much. Hi, Shay. Pastor Shay, look at you.
Morning.
Come on in. Are we potting?
That's
Can we do now?
That's hard to follow, right?
Don't try. You got to light little dogs on fire to follow people like that. Anyway, or hula hoops maybe on stage, that sort of thing. We try, well, there's a lot of things we try to do around here, but one of them is to create an awareness that the artistic gifts that God has given to people belong in spaces of worship. So I don't know about the church you grew up in. Most of the churches we grew up in, at least those that I'm close to, had some derivative of, let's scrub this building of any sort of symbol. Let's make this Walmart so people can hear the teaching. And what that does is it puts everything on the preacher to convey the gospel. But I say, bring back the art. Am I right? Kitty, am I talking to you? Bring back the songwriters and the poets and the sculptors. Don, I'm looking at you. Bring them back, because I don't want to carry the weight of expressing the gospel the way David can or the way Sam can. We need to empower one another to be goodness and to feed off of that. I don't know what this means to someone out there, but I just felt like I had to say it. So part of that allows us to do things like say, let's keep our songwriters alive. Let's buy records, let's go online, and let's do what we have to do. We can't lose this voice, you guys. We will emerge at some point after the artists at Pfizer figure out how to decode this thing. And then we will need to hear again from those who have incubated with this hope and bring this back to us. So all my heroes have always been the poets and the songwriters, and you know that. So anyway, thank you, David. As you gather today around the food that sustains you to do the great work of being alive today, which is its own gospel story, which is its own delight, just know that Jesus has promised to be actually in the food that sustains your body for the work of goodness in the world, for the work of love in darkness. And so just do that in memory of the presence of Jesus. And someday we will do that again here in this place together. As always, be generous with your support of us as a ministry as we go around the nation. Don't forget to include us in that. And remember, if you are following this feed and you don't really know all the points of connection of our community, we talked about this week at staff meeting. There's a lot of things that we sort of assume you know. Like, for example, if we say it went out in the email and you don't get the email, contact us so you can get the email, that sort of thing. We have points of contact that we assume you all know about, and sometimes it's on us to speak about that more. But contact us, contact me at jason@austinnewchurch.com, or Sam or Trey or Shay if you have questions about how to be engaged. We're not mastering the art of connection during COVID. We're staying alive. We're surviving. Someday we'll gather. But we do have this good news, and it leads into our benediction. There's something going on after church today, right? Shay, tell me about
Yes,
it.
we also care about basketball here.
We do. You do? We
And
do?
our athletes. We do. Some of us do. I'm just saying there's room for artists and for athletes.
There you go.
So
Well
we have
said.
a tournament. You know, it's our third year here. Most people don't know, but when we were at Bailey, we played football because we had a field. So
That's true. Yep.
Here at the church now, we have a basketball goal. So that's what we're doing.
Right.
We've made it a little bit safer. It used to be 3-on-3, so that we breathe less on each other. It's more of a shoot around with your pod. But we've got 9 teams, and there's still, 2 hours? You could show up, and we'll squeeze you in.
Okay, so that starts at 12:30 here at 2701.
Noon.
Sorry.
Clearly,
Noon.
you're not playing.
Exactly. What did I just tell you? It starts at noon here at 2701 South Lamar. If you're in Austin, swing by. We'll do it
Yes.
safely. Got some teams lined up.
Yes, we got a new trophy this year, too, because we know ANCers like bragging rights.
Exactly.
So,
And most importantly for the artists in the room, not to give the basketball players the leg up, we have a benediction that Sam wrote that transitions us back out into a world with the gospel we've just heard. So are you going to do the benediction?
yes.
Kill it. Let's do it.
I love Sam, and I love that she stuck with this theme for this week. All right. For the sweaty prophets, in the middle of the third quarter, a player sets the ball down, walks off, and gets water for the visiting team. The referee whistles, but it isn't a foul. The coach yells, but it isn't an error. No one knows what to do next. It has been a bloody battle, and injuries don't heal instantly. Love is not an endorsement, but neither is forgiveness, spitting in your hand before a limp high five and a good game. What then is required? Ask the player who stopped playing. Ask her who she saw behind the jersey. Ask her how she saw behind the jersey. Go and welcome the away team home. Thanks for being with us. See you next week.